Okay, it's nice to see not all of you here today. Last week you escaped, most of you. And it's very nice to welcome today Georgios Tsagdis, who is a very different voice, and I think is going to bring a very different perspective to things we've been discussing about writing, spacing, technique, trace, and I hope Georgios will tell you too, but I hope that you'll be present and you'll be asking questions during the talk, because we want actually to have it as a seminar and we want to have a discussion. And just to say that Georgios is coming from philosophy, from political and cultural studies, and he's based in both places, in two places, Westminster, the Law and Theory Lab, and also University of Greenwich. And I think you teach a lot of courses in many other schools.
That's right, yes. A bit of an errand.
You are a bit like a mobile tutor.
Exactly.
And you write a lot, and I think all of the students, they read the two pieces of writing you sent to us. And yes, I would more leave it to you now to open the discussion.
Thank you so much, Marina. This is a great introduction, and it is a great pleasure to be here with all of you. It is my first discussion with architects. I'm pretty exhilarated. I think I want this to be a discussion. I also find it particularly interesting in this instance that you had a chance to look at the text. I don't know how many of you did that. It's fine if you didn't. But if you did, I think that is a rare opportunity to sort of get feedback from you, hear your thoughts. Not only in terms of the exposition, which is the philosophical work, if you like, but also the writing, because this is, as far as I understand, a writing laboratory, among other things. And I want to also get feedback on your kind of approach to my writing. So, having said that, Marina said that the time frame of these seminars also vary. So she said I can keep you trapped here until midnight or so. I don't know. But the thing is, it's
as long as you take a break, eh?
yeah, lots of breaks, a few beers. But the structure is quite flexible. So if the interest sort of wanes, we can cut it short or not, depending on how far we want to get. I intended to sort of open the discussion with the essay on the hand, the manual. So the essay that actually approaches the metaphysical suppositions that prioritize the hand, not only as a trope, but as a matter of fact, as quite more than a trope, a literary trope, right? So I would like to do that, and through that approach writing, approach also deconstruction. I didn't want to start by a general introduction to Derrida and so on, but rather through the engagement with this, if you like, figure to begin with, the hand, bring across some of the themes of deconstruction and the relation of the body to techniques, precisely through writing. So the first thing I'm going to do is start, and before I do that, as a matter of fact, I want to repeat that at any moment. I will try to take pauses throughout, but at any moment, don't feel like it's good manners not to interrupt me. Please interrupt me. Just stop. I will try to be as slow as possible, but please stop me if I do not stop. We are trying to learn, so I'm reading you a passage from 1951, when Heidegger returned to the University of Freiburg to teach again for the first time after the denazification process. And there he's focusing at a certain point in the lectures on the hand. And he has to say the following, Heidegger. We are trying to learn thinking. Perhaps thinking too is just something like building a cabinet, Schrein in German. At any rate, it is a craft, a handicraft. Craft literally means the strength and skill in our hands. The hand is a peculiar thing. In the common view, the hand is part of our bodily organism. But the hand's essence can never be determined or explained by its being an organ which can grasp. Apes, too, have organs that can grasp, Greiforgane, but they do not have hands. The hand is infinitely different from all grasping organs, paws, claws, or fangs, different by an abyss of essence. Only a being who can speak, that is, think, can have hands, and can be handy in achieving works of handicraft. But the craft of the hand is richer than we commonly imagine. The hand does not only grasp and catch or push and pull. The hand reaches and extends, receives and welcomes, and not just things. The hand extends itself and receives its welcome in the hands of others. The hand holds, the hand carries. The hand designs and signs, presumably because man is a sign, ein Zeichen. Two hands fold into one, a gesture meant to carry man into great oneness. The hand is all this, and this is the true handicraft. Everything is rooted here that is commonly known as handicraft, and commonly we go no further. But the hand's gestures run everywhere through language in their most perfect purity, precisely where man speaks, by being silent. And only when man speaks does he think, not the other way around, as metaphysics still believes. Every motion of the hand in every of its works carries itself through the element of thinking. Every bearing of the hand bears itself in that element. All the work of the hand is rooted in thinking. Therefore, thinking itself is man's simplest, and for that reason hardest, handiwork, Handwerk, if it would be accomplished at its proper time. I find it interesting that at the very last moment time enters. But, so this is Heidegger, yes? Thinking is like building a cabinet. And all this is a relation of thought to writing. And that for many reasons. What we get here, it is interesting, right? Because on the one hand, what we get is craft, right? Technics already, the ability to build. And on the other hand, we have nature. We have apes. Yeah, they have grasping organs, but they do not have hands. So the hand is this strange thing that, of course, does the building, opens from nature to technicity, but we will see that it is not simply a technological, if you like, it is not simply a condition of technology. It's the essence of the hand is not technology, or even the essence of technology might not be the hand. Those kind of formulations that Heidegger is very familiar with. So what I'm saying is that although we seem to think here, yes, well, apes have hands, they have Greiforgane, but they don't have hands. We do because we build, therefore we enter the domain of technics. It is not so simple for Heidegger, and we will see the relation of the writing hand, the hand that writes with a pen, to the hand that writes with a typewriter. It is a very, very important distinction for Heidegger. Before I proceed, anything you would like to draw out? You see, so I'm already sort of pausing, asking. Yes? Yes?
I'm just wondering, he seems to open up the possibility of, sort of hand in hand, so exchange or
Yes.
gesture towards the other, but at the same time he seems to move away from it, so that it's towards the material world that his interest is focused.
That's right.
And I'm just wondering if that, is there any way of reopening the social or the interbodily dimension of hand?
I think the use of the hand does three things for Heidegger here, and I'm going to be coming to that in a point. And one of them, of course, is precisely the dimension of the body, right? How the body functions in that. I would say, indeed, that it is sort of a very elusive thing. I think, and I actually have written about that elsewhere. There is one testimony in the camps where someone is going to the crematorium and they're holding a little packet with them, and one of the other prisoners, they observe, well, what are they doing? Why are they taking this package with them? Yeah? And the other response, it is not so that because they believe they will use it or have anything to do with that, but because by holding it, they sort of still attach themselves to humanity, right? So it's this idea that you hold even an object, and through the object, through the hand, you attach yourself to another human. So, the hand can, even through objects, mediate, this is non-Marxist fetishism, I would say, of the object, the fact that it actually is human relations behind objects. But I think this is precisely something that Heidegger brushes aside, the relation to the other. Yes, he's not so much interested in that. And we do see his another big problematic issue here clearly is the position of the animal, right? We have decided in advance, apes do not have hands. That's clear. It's just grasping organs. So we'll see what that means again. So what I want to first draw attention to is what Derrida does with that. He focuses on this phrase that we see here. He says, the hand designs and signs presumably, because man is a sign. And this Derrida lasses on, and anyone who knows Heidegger is familiar with this famous line from Hölderlin that he repeats time and again. So the line in German says, ein Zeichen sind wir deutungslos, and in the English that is, we are a sign, meaningless, painless we are, and have almost lost the language in foreign lands, right? So this is Hölderlin. We are a sign, meaningless, painless we are, and have almost lost the language in foreign lands. So this is something that Heidegger repeats again. So when he says, presumably because man is a sign, he's indirectly referencing Hölderlin. And so Derrida latches onto that, and actually latches onto a French translation which doesn't seem to satisfy him very well, but he finds very interesting that here the translation is monstre, the Zeichen, the sign. It's this notion that is very important for Derrida, the notion of monstration. To monstrate, as in to demonstrate, is to show, it is to present. And so Derrida will, you can say, through his characteristic hyperbolic irony, use the monstrosity that the man is. The man is the monstrous being, the being that monstrates, so to say. And he will use that to sort of press Heidegger onto what exactly is. And one of the things that this monstration, with this monstrosity perhaps will be precisely that man, for Derrida, has only one hand. So Heidegger always talks about the hand. He doesn't speak about the hands, but about the hand, one. Yeah? And so for Derrida, this is part of the monstrosity. Yeah? That we are this one-handed being. I'll come back to that, and I will see whether that is quite the case as such. But I also want to say that the notion of monstrosity and monstration is very important for Derrida in general. So grammatology has this exergue, as he calls it, like this sort of, if you like, opening, and it closes, the last words of that, if you like, preface, are: the future can only be anticipated in the form of an absolute danger. It is that which breaks absolutely with constituted normality and can only be proclaimed, presented, as a sort of monstrosity. For that future world and for that within it which will have put into question the values of sign, word and writing, for that which guides our future anterior, there is as yet no excerpt, no preface. Right? So he closes this the preface with, well, announcing the absolute danger of the future. So if you see the future, which will later Derrida he will call it the avenir, the to come. Yeah. At the time, it is designated as a monstrosity. It is designated as the appearing, the monstration of an absolute danger. Okay. So we might ask, what danger does Derrida possibly have in mind? What is the danger? And here again, Heidegger and Hölderlin become very important. So in Bremen 1949, Heidegger gave some very famous lectures. One of them was simply titled The Danger, and another one was called The Turn. They were collectively kind of used to create this the question concerning technology, the famous essay of Heidegger. They were the background on which this essay was based, and the lecture, the turn, uses this famous again phrase by Hölderlin, which sort of surfaces in other parts of Heidegger's work, but it is there. And he says, but where danger is, grows the saving power also. Yeah? Where danger is, grows the saving power also. So that's Hölderlin used by Heidegger, who has just given a lecture called The Danger, and now he's giving a lecture called The Turn. So if we simply look at the very title of what these lectures became, namely the question concerning technology, we can put two and two together and simply say, for the sake of brevity, danger. The danger is technology. Yes. So I'm obviously making shortcuts. What I'm trying to say is that, and there are specific reasons. So, for example, the critique there will be the critique of, for example, mechanized food industry in those lectures, which Heidegger will even audaciously compare to the camps. Yeah. So these lectures, they really thematize the, if you like, essence of technology, and they will become they will take an essay form. But so what I'm trying to say is that the danger that sort of Heidegger diagnoses, and which is also part of the demonstration that that Derrida has in mind, is nothing else but technology. Little pause here. Thoughts?
Questions?
Questions, yes?
Might be helpful to set up more of the historical context within which Heidegger would make these arguments. Because his philosophy does change in the post-denazification process.
Yes.
And also when we think about it in architectural terms,
yes,
these kinds of periodizations are extremely important for understanding what problems are seen to exist within technology or within industrial questions of production.
Yeah. Well, I mean, people speak about the turn of Heidegger. I think there's very few things that change in Heidegger over time. One of them is his relationship to the hand. But I do think that in general, there is less of a turn than people make out. I think there is a deep sort of deep current of, if you like, luditism, of kind of fear of technology from his very early days, when he goes from Tottenauberg, from Magdeburg, where is it, Meeskirch to Freiburg to study, for example. He's shocked by the city, which is Freiburg in the 1900s, by today's standards, totally not technological. But there is a great resistance to technology, and from early on. Aside of that, we're indeed talking about the work here that sort of follows the war. I'm not sure what sort of answer would quite be kind of enough to your question. I think to some extent what he tries to do is to diagnose the failure of Nazism in a common ground as, if you like, the success of capitalism. I think what he's trying to show is that that Nazism, capitalism, and Bolshevism, they actually, at the heart of it, suffer the same pathology. A great part of which is technology. If you like, this is his aggressive apology, yes, to say, well, yes, this was a doomed project, Nazism, but let's look at what is happening in the rest of the world. You're actually going to fail as well, and fail, if you like, spectacularly, like at an absolutely grand scale. And there's a lot of considerations that enter into his mind. I mean, he's doing this kind of deep ecology stuff at the time. He's really kind of exploring a lot of things that will resonate much later. Like, he's in some ways he's pioneering, and I don't think he's doing very different things from the Frankfurt School to a good extent. Like if you look at these writings, and if then you look what Marcuse, and of course Marcuse because he was influenced by Heidegger, but also Adorno, for example, are writing. I think to some extent Adorno hated Heidegger because he was writing very similar things to him, because he shouldn't. He was a Nazi, and so I think. I don't know whether that does anything in terms of periodization. Do you have anything specific in mind that you'd like to contribute?
Well, reflections on technology, technical nihilism, and so forth within architectural culture are often connected to post-war trends away from the modern movement towards, say, postmodernism in general terms. So contextualizing Heidegger, especially the political ambiguity of that position and the way it becomes part of what I would characterize as a kind of liberal postmodern position.
Yeah. Well, if I say that ad hominem, he had a nervous breakdown. He had to sort of be curated. Like he had to be, and there were a lot of things. There were a lot of things at stake, and people like, for example, Hannah Arendt and Sartre, for example, they were key in the, if you like, rehabilitation of Heidegger as a significant philosopher after the war. He was, in the first instance, quite unpopular, and then it was through, specific inroads. There was Beaufret and a number of other people that helped sort of somehow re-establish him in France and elsewhere. And it's interesting because there's a great reception of Heidegger in Japan, which is interesting, like from a political and historical perception. By the time the English, I think, translated, being in time the first time, I think the Japanese had 5 translations or something. But I think after the war he really is, to some extent, sort of marginalized. But because of those key figures, he has a certain sort of public. And then after that will come people like Derrida, who who will have a huge influence in making Heidegger relevant again, I would say. He's not alone, but I think, yes, and not quickly giving in. I think that's the thing, like, that often Derrida was sort of hated for when, for example, Victor Forays' book came out and sort of presented the kind of Nazi case. Like, not quickly giving in to the accusations, which are there, and so on, but actually trying to see what is philosophically significant. Is there anything philosophically significant in this Nazism? And there's a lot of people who will say there is. Anyway, I really do not want to make that about Heidegger's Nazism. Like, I think it's a bit off topic. But yes, he definitely. I think we could not have had Derrida without Heidegger. There's no question. Like, Derrida would not have been the same. So postmodernism would not have been the same.
I just think the post-war moment in which this philosophy is being produced has a very clear connection to the way we can think about it in an architectural connection.
Yes.
In where architectural reflection is headed. And obviously the connection to Derrida is a very clear connection to architectural culture in the post-war period of the 20th century.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Well, just to add to the general kind of picture that Heidegger is trying to paint, just going to the years 42-43 during the war in his lectures on the Parmenides, he says, "Man does not have hands, but the hand holds the essence of man, because the word, as the essential realm of the hand, is the ground of the essence of man." So we see again an alignment. It's kind of tricky because he's moving between those positions, The hand, Dasein or even man, they're not the same and the relation is complex. Then the word. It seems that it's not always quite clear whether the word sort of grounds a hand, so to say, or the other way around. But for Heidegger, the word comes first, and that will be Derrida's critique. Ultimately, that will be Derrida's critique, that for Heidegger, the word comes first. That becomes particularly clear when, in this, again, later essay, what is called Thinking, Heidegger will write the following. Whenever man is properly drawing that way, he's thinking, even though he may still be far away from what withdraws, even though the withdrawal may remain as veiled as ever. All through his life and right into his death, Socrates did nothing else than place himself into this draught, this current, and maintain himself in it. This is why he is the purest thinker of the West. This is why he wrote nothing. Okay, and that is the extraordinary thing that Heidegger rarely talks about Socrates. It is about Plato. He writes, it's Plato the philosopher. Socrates is nowhere in a way, and strangely he's suddenly here. And Derrida would precisely claim that this is because of a metaphysics that prioritizes the kind of interiority of meaning. It prioritizes the sort of self-presence of the meaning before it is exteriorized, before it's externalized in a sign. Yes? So, Socrates is the purest, and the notion of purity, of course, is important. And here we can hear all the political overtones. Yeah. So Socrates is the purest thinker. Why? Because he doesn't taint the self-proximity and the self-presence of thought with writing. Doesn't exteriorize it. Doesn't sort of kick it outside the house, the oikos. And we'll see what that means. So that will ultimately be Derrida's critique, namely that Heidegger will always return to that presupposition, and everything that he will then have to say about the hand will be based on this primacy of the silent, self-present word. Yeah? And it is interesting because, yes, in a sense, the writing hand is silent, and it is simply a craft that almost practices the truth of the word without necessarily adding anything to it, without necessarily changing it. It simply gives, if you like, a cabinet for the thought. And just to say so, out of etymological interest, that the German word Schrein, what the cabinet is the same word as the English shrine, yeah, and it goes back to the Latin scrinium, which is it's not just any case or casket, but it's actually a chest of books. Yes. So originally, the scrinium or the shrine is where you keep your books. So what the hand builds is a place to keep, to contain, if you like, encyclopedically, knowledge, to contain thought. Yes. So in a way, the hand builds. What the hand does is enframes, if you like, produces the little frame, and the word enframing is as you might know, important for Heidegger, the notion of Gestell. This builds this cabinet for the silent word to dwell. Yeah. So going back to what I promised a second earlier, namely what for Derrida Heidegger aims to achieve by referring to the hand, by using the hand. Yeah. So on the one hand, it is precisely corporeality, the kind of theme of corporeality, which otherwise is not very strong in Heidegger. Yeah. Heidegger doesn't talk about the body. Dasein is never hungry, as Levinas says. Yeah. It doesn't have a sex. It doesn't have needs. It doesn't have desires, and so on. And suddenly, the hand just does this, and I'm gonna examine why that might still be the case in these texts. Okay, that's one thing. The other thing it does, it is supposedly escaping this ontic logic that Heidegger is so averse to. Ontic meaning, for Heidegger, there is a strict distinction between any being, a desk, a pen, and being itself. Yes? So this is what Heidegger calls an ontological difference. Any being we encounter things. These are ontic things. They're not ontological. Ontology for Heidegger in Being and Time refers to being itself. So the hand is not of the order of a thing. It's not there. The hand that Heidegger talks about is not, although it makes that gesture, if you like, towards corporeality, it is not just the hand that we have, if you like. It's a metaphysical supposition. It is the ground of what we are, yes? The hand holds the essence of man. It's not a physical thing that holds the essence of man. Yeah? So that is the second thing that the hand is meant to do. It is meant to introduce that element of deep ontology. Yeah? And of course, by not being part of this ontology, it is not part of simply like a practice of utility. It is not simply that just busying itself, making things, and so it's not. It is resistant to trade. It's resistant to business. It kind of can. It is not the hand that busies itself with production, and that kind of figures all those themes of rustic craftsmanship that Heidegger was very invested in, right? The simple making of wood cutting and hammering, and yes. So this is the hand that is not really sort of taken up in the logic of production, right? But rather a hand that simply builds a cabinet for thought, simply does this kind of, if you like, almost useless work. So by doing all those things, of course, by saying, this is not, I'm not talking about the hand of the body, Heidegger also distances himself from biologism and organicism, the kind of criticism that, of course, were important from a Nazi perspective, right? So it is not. I'm not talking about the body. I'm not that kind of biological Nazi, if you'd like, right? This is ideological brown shirt stuff. This is simply, if you like, conservatism, but it's not racial ideology. Yeah. So he's distinguishing himself from biology. So the hand is not a biological. He says apes have Greiforgane, right? I'm not talking about that kind of stuff. I'm not talking about biology. I'm talking about this metaphysical hand. Okay. So for Derrida, Heidegger does those three things when he takes distance from by using the hand in this way. So we've seen his distance from simple nature, from simple biology. Yeah. What I want to introduce now is the other side of the dimension, the issue of the typewriter and technology at large. So how he will also distance himself from this mass technology. Okay. Let's take that in as well and think it with everything that's been said. So he says, Heidegger again, it is not accidental that modern man writes with the typewriter and dictiert, the same word as poetize, that is dichten in German, into a machine. This history of the kinds of writing is one of the main reasons for the increasing destruction of the word, that silent word and so on. The latter no longer comes and goes by means of the writing hand, the properly acting hand, but by means of the mechanical forces it releases. The typewriter tears writing from the essential realm of the hand, that is, the realm of the word. The word itself turns into something typed, where typewriting, on the contrary, is only a transcription and serves to preserve the writing, or turns into print something already written, there it has a proper, though limited, significance. In the time of the first dominance of the typewriter, a letter written on this machine still stood for a breach of good manners. Today, a handwritten letter is an antiquated and undesired thing. It disturbs speed reading. Mechanical writing deprives the hand of its rank in the realm of the written word and degrades the word to a means of communication. In addition, mechanical writing provides this advantage that it conceals the handwriting and thereby the character. The typewriter makes everyone look the same. Yeah? So these are the objections that Heidegger has with regard to the typewriter. He says, first of all, two things. It conceals the sort of, if you like, the essence of the individual writing, if you like, and it produces speed effects. Yeah. So by typing into the typewriter, you change the way you think because you change your relation to the word. Yeah. So in that sense, he's very clearly a media theorist, albeit a conservative one. We'll see the progressive side of that, right? So, but he is very clearly saying, if you use the typewriter, you're going to alter your way of writing, and you're going to think differently. And two of the prominent reasons that directly stand out is you don't have your unique identity, and you write too fast. You say too much. You copy-paste today, right? And you don't take the necessary time that thought requires. Now, there's so much to be said, and of course you might be familiar with the notion that, let's say, fonts, for example, are the equivalent of fashion for letters, printed letters, right? So you can see the font as the dress of the printed typed word, right? It's different to use Calibri, to use Garamond, and so on. Yeah, these are different dresses. But even so, Heidegger would respond, this is simply but pret-à-porter fashion. Yeah, this is not still the essence of all of us. Yeah, so it's interesting because Heidegger is someone who is very much interested in the hidden. He's interested in concealment, in the Kryptestei, in the Verdeckung, and so on. All those notions, right? And yet, when it comes to writing and the way it sort of conceals our specificity, our uniqueness, then it immediately becomes a problem, right? He's thinking constantly modes of concealment as a philosopher, and yet the concealment that the typewriter produces is anathema, is to be sort of expelled from thinking. Now, Derrida will locate this response here because what it seems to be happening for Heidegger is that the difference is between typing between two hands and writing with one pen. Yes, so it is here precisely that Derrida says, okay, look at the monster with the one hand. Yeah, the monster that holds the plummeted pen, for example, rather than the plumed pen, but rather than the one who. And it's interesting, like from a biographical perspective, apparently Derrida himself originally wrote with a pen, but very, very fast he moves to the typewriter, and throughout in his life he's carrying those Olivettis and whatnot, and then later he moves on to computers. So he has like one of those first old Macs, like huge. So he's very much into into that type of writing. Yes, very consciously, very consciously. So yes, yeah.
Did he use?
That is a good question. Yeah.
Font did he use?
Well, that's the thing. I think the notion of fonts is becoming so current today. But I think for Heidegger, the uniformity of the type word was so much more prominent. Yeah. So you had one typewriter, had one font. That was it. That's what it did. No. But I mean, it is interesting because today we see this kind of micro customization. Yeah, and we see this as an expression of our identity because we can do all those things. We can even make our own fonts if we're so inclined. But I mean, is that a solution? Is that simply ameliorating what is at stake, or is that perhaps what it is after all? Yeah, is it if you see like a theoretical value in this question? Yes.
Maybe it's a bit out of place now to ask for Heidegger's position on the image.
Okay.
As a sort of, almost you can read in parallel the critique of Benjamin's reproducibility of the image.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of wondering what is his relation to the mechanically produced image.
Yeah, he's clearly in that regard against it. Yeah, he wants to he's an oral thinker. Yeah, he wants to maintain the aura of the work of art, so to say. What Benjamin thinks that has to be overcome. Let me see for a second here. Yes, I did at some point have a quote from Benjamin. Instead, So here, so no, it's absolutely fine. I want to connect it to the notion of present, the relation of presence and absence. And instead of responding directly to the image, I will refer to architecture. Okay, so Derrida, in some sort of apocryphal lecture, he says, yeah, that you have the pleasure of reading when you read secondary literature where people have done archival work. He says, the paradox, of course, is that on the face of it, architecture seems to have nothing to do with absence. In one of Heidegger's texts, he says that a temple is a place where God is present, but that implies that a temple is an empty place ready to receive God. It is the ultimate paradox of logocentrism. So, because of its unique relationship to representation, architecture is more present than any other art, but at the same time, being the most present, it is also the strongest reference to the opposite of presence, namely absence. I'm getting at something here, namely, what is being, you can understand Benjamin's aura in the following way, that the work of art maintains a certain, its presence, its kind of physical existence is what creates its aura. And its aura might be expandable, it might be, it's not reproducible. The aura is not reproducible because it is attached to the uniqueness, the placement, the fact that this work is consigned to a very unique place. That is what creates aura. Yes? So you can have the aura insofar as you have a certain absence of the work of art. So, for example, you think, oh, if I go and see the Mona Lisa, you know, you're thinking about it all your life, like I have to make this pilgrimage to the Louvre and see the Mona Lisa. So the Mona Lisa works its effect through its aura, through its being absent in every possible position, right? We're all thinking about the Mona Lisa. And it only exists in this tiny enclosed place. It's generated from this one specific locality, from its immovability. Yeah? And in the same way, architecture has to relate with that relation of presence and absence. And the question is, I would say, for Heidegger, how does the image play out in this relation? And he would also want to locate. He would also, in that sense, that's what I said, in Benjaminian terms, Heidegger is a thinker of the aura. Because he will, if you like, although he thinks about absence, as you see here, the absent God in the temple, right? He will also think of that through a possibility of reconstituting a presence. At least that is Derrida's critique. I mean, if you're a Heideggerian, you might not want to go down this path. You might claim that still Heidegger thinks slightly differently, that it's not a reconstitution of a presence that he has in mind. But the empty architectural building that is a temple awaits for the God. And if you like, the aura waits for its artwork. And the image waits for what it images, if you like. That would be the critique. And just to close this sort of, if you like, digression into architecture and temples in Heidegger, he also speaks about the ruins of a temple and how they sort of, what we actually do when we relate to a ruin is that we reconstitute a world. So from the fragments that we come across, if you like, aesthetic play is that we recreate this, for example, antique world that has disappeared. So the meaning of the ruins consists in the recreation of this world, of this departed world. And the departure of the world is precisely what invests this unique locality with the ghost of a presence. Yeah? And sort of invests it with an aura. That's why the ruin has an aura. Yeah? So I think very much Heidegger is a thinker of the aura, and he would insist on the uniqueness That's why perhaps he's more interested in ancient temples than in photographs, for example. Yeah. Yes.
Kind of bring back 20th century architectural questions. It seems to me that one way to tie together the question of the image, the architectural object, is through the question of the production, or say the image in Benjamin's terms, or in Heidegger's, is the question of the production of the architectural object. And I think then you could probably think about it through the way Heidegger thinks about projection as a kind of, as that being a temporal moment, which could clearly be connected to how we think about architecture, like as an architect rather than looking at a temple, thinking about architecture as a project or as a production. And then clearly I think there are complex ways in which an idea of projection in Heidegger's terms would differ from an idea of technical reproducibility in Benjamin's terms.
Yes. 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 To the extent that the art would enter the production, the technology machine, the manufacture, for Heidegger, it would be totally destroyed. There is no question to that. There is no art that is mechanically produced for Heidegger, and he has the notion, for example, in the early work, the notion of the Entwurf, what it means to kind of throw ahead of you.
That's what
you're sort of getting it. But it's not something, I'm not so sure, he doesn't use it the way we talk about having a project, and getting a grant for it, and just kind of, that's not exactly, yes.
It's almost in German the only way to kind of speak of an architecture project.
Entwurf.
Use the word Entwurf.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if you speak, express it as Projekt, it's something quite unspecific.
That's right.
To architecture. Seems to me much more clearly related to architecture.
Yeah, but I think, to some extent what the Entwurf does is also maintains a certain chance event. One thinks of Mallarmé here, one thinks of the throw of dice, the casting, one thinks of the notion of Geworfenheit in Heidegger, being thrown into the world, like each of us are thrown into a language, we're thrown into a world, and we sort of then, existentially, we find ourselves in a condition of thrownness. So the notion of the throwing is, it's one that on the one hand sort of introduces an element of chance, I would say, and an element of play, and which cannot be quite mechanized in that regard. Guess, because otherwise we'd have computers for architects, which we might. Soon.
Stakes, though, are very clear.
Yes.
In historical terms.
Yes.
In what constitutes architectural techniques, technology, production.
Yeah.
From a modern movement perspective, in which technical reproducibility, mass production is clearly part of the problem of architecture, part of its social historical challenge. And I would argue that today that context exists in a different way, and certainly in architecture's cultural project, or in the way that it considers itself architecture, say with a capital A, as opposed to something else. The meaningful character of the project, not just in the sense of getting a grant or the generic term of the project.
Yes.
The project is a very specific value for architecture in the contemporary moment.
Well, I'm not saying that Heidegger has anything, if you like, against architecture. He thinks precisely in those.
No, it's the opposite.
Exactly.
I think the stakes are very clear for contemporary architecture. Why Heidegger would be an important reference.
But I think that is the question, because what we want to perhaps challenge is the idea of a craftsman architect. The rustic architect, the one who sort of has the unique kind of aura and sort of knows how to build this unique building that will stand out and which in market terms will produce like immense added value because it's not generically produced and so on. So everybody can capitalize on that. So of course the market economy wants the unique aura. That's what sells, right? How much you can sell a photograph for even today? Like, I mean, regardless of everything, that's the whole point, that anyone can possess it. But that's not good enough. And the question is, do we effectively return to this idea of Heidegger, not perhaps out of, I don't know, political reasons, but simply out of economical reasons, market economy reasons, because we just want to...
I think this is the point
That's part of the
making,
state.
is
Yeah.
that the recuperation of Heidegger's or radical conservatism is precisely an ideological moment in the construction of a contemporary dominant subjectivity, in which the historical need of precisely the market relations you are describing is to compatibilize the aura with the historical fact of mechanical reproduction.
Yes. Yes, you're quite right. And I would say that you can hardly find an architect, a successful architect, that doesn't do precisely that. But I would also claim that this has been the case all along, if you'd like. And that is, if you like, as well, Derrida's reading, that actually that relationship has always been an interdependent relationship of technicity and whatever we might call non-technicity, like the spirit, the human, and so on. That this relationship has been there all along, and that instead of simply the question is how it is modulated. You know, where does the emphasis? So the declaration and the description need not coincide. Yes, you might say that I am thinking through an oral paradigm, so to call it, right? I believe in this return to sort of presence to and so on, but actually to be constantly using technology at the very heart of your thoughts in order to think. Yes? So it doesn't matter what you proclaim. That is the wager, if you like. Doesn't matter what you proclaim. Technology is working within the way you construct philosophy, the way you construct architecture, and so on. So I'm only saying that you're absolutely right, but I would want, with Derrida, to trace this development to the invention of Neolithic artifacts, for example, tools. Yes. So I think already there you have the uniqueness of the production with technical conditions, and they're indissoluble. They're indissoluble in the cave paintings. They're indissoluble in the construction of hunting tools. Yeah, that's what I think. I mean, you might not be willing to follow me on that. Let me say one thing, because so let me give you the. Oh, here. So Derrida writes that a war was declared and a suppression of all that resisted linearization was installed, namely linear writing, right? So before that, you can say we have the ideogram and the hieroglyphics and so on, and then you have linearization. You have the writing through lines. So he says a war was declared and a suppression of all that resisted linearization was installed. And first of what Leroy-Grand calls the mythogram, the writing that spells its symbols pluridimensionally. There the meaning is not subjected to successivity, to being successive, to the order of a logical time, or to the irreversible temporality of sound. This pluridimensionality does not paralyze history within simultaneity. It corresponds to another level of historical experience, and one may just as well consider, conversely, linear thought as a reduction of history. So history is pluridimensional. What linearization does, it orders it on a single linear dimension. Okay. So and supposedly, and it's interesting to actually follow the patterns. If you read the grammatology, you'll see how people like Rousseau or Leibniz, and you read them Leibniz himself, how they thought about other possibilities to linearization. But what I want to say is that, interestingly, Derrida will also call architecture mythography, precisely in that sense, in the sense that it sort of resists linearization. Yes? So, why I'm saying this, because it is someone like Leroy-Guérin who does all this anthropological research to understand the emergence of the tool and its shaping of the human, right? So he's an anthropologist with sort of philosophical inclinations who does precisely this work, and he uses this word, the mythogram, to refer to pluridimensional writing. And Derrida will use it occasionally to refer to architecture, that architecture works precisely on multiple dimensions, that it doesn't have a successive meaning and perhaps not even necessarily a meaning in the traditional logocentric sense. So I think technology is there from the beginning, and the question in its relationship to the aura is there from the beginning. Pressing on a little bit, and I promise after that we'll move on to like maybe have a break, or I don't know, or like we can see what we do. Maybe we can have a small second part. Have a break, small second part. You know, I just to point out that actually there is a moment in early sort of Heideggerian texts where you get a sense that there are two hands, and that there is a bodily constitution that necessitates that. So there is this corporeal phenomenology that Heidegger will do in his early days. But I do think that, as I was saying, one of the movements is precisely him moving away from this corporeal phenomenology, and actually so that by the time we have all this text that I've been talking about, what we have is the singular hand, the metaphysical hand, and so on, not the phenomenologically sort of corporeal hand. But I will not insist too much on that. I will also draw your attention to another important element in Heidegger's thought, simply this thing in being in time where you have presence at hand and readiness to hand. So you have the ready to hand and the present at hand. These are the two, vorhanden and zuhanden, the two types of being. He says, Heidegger, we relate to the world in those two ways. That we relate to the world either as, if you like, being ready to hand. That's what a tool is. When I hold a tool, I don't feel the tool. I don't experience the tool. What I experience is the practice of hammering. Like the tool disappears in my hand, and what I'm left with is the simple practice of hammering. Right. So I'm feeling the nail rather than the hammer. So this is the relation we have to the world. When in the morning we wake up and we put on our shoes and our jacket, we do not experience them as objects, the same way that we would experience them in a gallery, so to say, right? We don't experience them as those strange material artifacts that have a texture and so on. They just simply recede in our engagement with them. Yeah, I don't know how familiar you are with that idea, but this is what Heidegger calls the ready to hand. Yeah? So that is one experience of the world. The other comes about when the tool breaks, and suddenly in front of you you have something that doesn't work, and suddenly it's not a hammer anymore, it's just a thing. Yeah, it's just present. And in that moment, you sort of, your relationship to the thing is transformed. So what I am simply saying is that you look at being and time, and you have those two terms that are central throughout the work, and we don't necessarily think about them as anything to do with hands. Yeah, we think, oh, something is ready at hand. Yeah, something is at hand, we say, and we don't think really about hands. We just think that in our sphere it is proximal, it is usable. Yeah. So the hand in that way disappears, as we were saying before. It's not the physical hand. And I think what is interesting is that in being and time, those two hands never appear at the same time. You cannot have both being in hand and present in hand. It's almost as though indeed there is only one hand, and one time it is present, and another time it is ready, so to say. Yeah. So they do not, somehow again is this monstrosity of never two hands, never both at once, rather in turn presenting the world in two different ways. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yes. No.
So just to clarify, is this something that Heidegger was saying in his text? That like this was like evident in his texts that you could either have one or the other?
This is my interpretation.
That's your interpretation. Okay, because I was just wondering if that's the case, like when you're saying about the tool being like you just put on your jumper or whatever and then you forget it. Like if Heidegger could like use a typewriter naturally, would that not then sort of be like assumed into the same way that he used the pen? I just don't really see, like that argument seems to sort of refute that part beforehand about the use of the typewriter versus the pen.
Yes, you're quite right, and I think the issue with the typewriter. Yes, you're quite right. I think it becomes a problem because the typewriter, as we'll see now, is neither a tool. Nor is it precisely of the same order as the hand. So what he says is. He distinguishes the typewriter both from the hammer and from the nuclear turbine. He says it is an intermediate thing. It is a mere mechanism. It's not a machine, it's a mechanism. And it doesn't have a proper essence. It's a third thing. So it's not properly technological, and it's not simply a tool. So it is simply caught up for Heidegger in this in-between status.
Are there any other objects or things which are in this in-between status? Because it seems like I just don't believe him.
Yes. No, that's quite, yeah.
I don't agree.
Yeah. Well, you're quite right, and the question would be, I don't believe him either. Yeah. So the question is, what warrants this status? Yeah, what establishes the typewriter?
It's like he's just afraid of it, so he's just like, I'm going to put it in this third category because I can't really deal with it.
Yes. Well, exactly. I would say that it starts from like levels of exteriorization. So in Plato we have in the Phaedrus, right, the famous scene of the presentation of writing to Thoth. So the idea is that the writing is presented and it's seen both as a harbinger of immense possibilities. So what the writing can suddenly do is it can create memory, but that is artificial memory, what Plato calls hypomnesis, right? But the Thoth response, well, but that is at the cost of true memory, that is anamnesis. So yes, we remember what we have scribbled down only because we can read it again, not because we actually remember it. Our memory only reaches the point of just knowing where to look at. That's the so it's an exteriorization of memory. So that is the criticism that exists there, right? By Plato, someone who writes a lot. And so we have also Heidegger, who thinks that Socrates is the greatest thinker of the West, yes? Because he says nothing. But Heidegger himself has 100 volumes in his collected edition. So suddenly there is this kind of amazing contradiction. Yes, as with Plato, there's this critique in the Phaedrus, yet Plato writes. Heidegger thinks that, silence is the best way to deal with a word, and yet he also writes. Now, the interesting thing is that I believe these are levels of difference, levels of distance between this idea that I was explaining before, that we possess a direct relation to the thing, whatever that thing is, the other person, history, being, God, and so on, right? We possess a direct relationship with it. And at every moment we sort of distance ourselves from that, we lose something. And writing is the first thing that does that, because it replaces hypomnesis for anamnesis. So anamnesis for hypomnesis. So it exchanges at least the life of our memory with a dead memory. And Heidegger would say, well, the typewriter is one more step away. It is not yet perhaps exactly a printing press or whatever, a nuclear turbine, but it takes us one step away again in this place of, he says, the typewriter is a signless cloud, a cloud without signs, that is, withdrawing concealment in the midst of its very obtrusiveness, and through it the relation of being to man is transformed. It is in fact signless, zeichenlos, not showing itself as to its essence. So it sort of occludes, if you like, its own essence, its essence being that kind of in-between place. It occludes also the human essence being a relation to the word. So it doesn't quite mechanize humans, so it doesn't quite turn them into cyborgs yet, perhaps, or fully AI, uploaded consciousness. It doesn't quite do that yet, but it just pushes the word one step further away from the sort of silent proximity. So I think it's the same story, beginning from Plato and moving on to Heidegger. And I think that just the typewriter is just a symptomatic moment historically that he protests against. Yeah? And it's interesting, and I'll say that and really finish this part, but it's interesting I don't know how I've tired you a lot. You hanging on? Okay. So I'll just close with that. Simply the fact that on the antipode we have Nietzsche. We have Nietzsche, right? Who is supposedly, as Kittler calls him, the first mechanized philosopher of the West. That's how Kittler calls him. And it's interesting because I think Kittler sort of gets that from Derrida, but never says that. But anyway, he says, so what happens is the typewriter is, of course, Nietzsche was growing blind, and it was very hard for him to concentrate for a long amount of times. So for him, the typewriter, he had this very intricate ball of a typewriter, very different, like prototypes. Yes, that's the late 19th century, and but it's breaking down all the time. It's a terrible machine. He cannot operate it, but he hopes that through that he will be able to overcome his sort of blindness. But you can say, okay, this is symptomatic simply of the fact that he was ill. Yeah. On the other hand, I wish to say that it is symptomatic of an epoch. It is actually symptomatic of a transformation of thought at large. This is what Kittler says about T.S. Eliot. He says, T.S. Eliot, who will be composing The Wasteland on a typewriter, finds, no different from Nietzsche, that, and now this is Eliot, I am sloughing off all my long sentences, which I used to dote upon, short, staccato, like modern French prose. Instead of subtlety, the typewriter makes for lucidity, which is, however, nothing but the effect of its technology on style. On style, yes. So Kittler sees not just, for example, he takes Eliot as a good testimony to show that it's not simply a Nietzsche's illness, but that actually there is a change in the mode of thinking, which is, if you like, mutually conditioned. Nietzsche is pushing towards the typewriter transforms his thinking into aphorisms. He has his migraines, he cannot concentrate for too long, but it's not just that, it's also that the typewriter necessitates short staccato modes of thought, yeah? Tweeting style. That's what you do.
That's what Derrida did, the aphorism stuff.
Yeah. So, to close with another passage from Kittler, he says, the typewriter became a discursive machine gun. A technology whose basic action, not coincidentally, consists of strikes and triggers, proceeds in automated and discrete steps, as does ammunitions transport in a revolver and a machine gun, or celluloid transport in a film projector. The pen was once mightier than the sword, Otto Burghagen, the first monographer of the typewriter, writes in 1898. But where the typewriter rules, he continues, Krupp's cannons must remain silent. So once the pen was mightier than the sword, now we have the typewriter, and it's mightier than the machine guns and the cannons. Yeah, and so you see how kind of war technology corresponds to writing technology, and what Derrida, as you call it, radical conservatism, sees from one perspective with regard to the effect of the medium on thought, sort of Kittler, for example, will see from the other side. Yeah. So if you like, the revolutionary potential in this transformation of thought. Okay. So I hope with all this, what I've sort of tried to do, what I hope I might have done to some extent, is to show that there is an essential relation within the history of metaphysics, between fundamental ontology, the relation of presence and absence, and the ways in which that is, if you like, medialized, in the ways in which it is being exteriorized. And the hand in this history has a very important function. Anthropologically, we see with Leroy-Guérin the kind of the way in which we will develop tools, but also metaphysically. So that is either part one or everything. It's up to you.
I have a question.
Yes, of course.
How do you think Heidegger, or if he discusses the relationship between intention and the tool, like if there is a difference, or to what extent, like it's clear that certain tools or technology inform certain ways in which we think and ways in which we make things. But that doesn't necessarily address the issue of intention.
Mm-hmm. How do you think of intention? I like the word a lot. I use it in some cases. What do you think with intention? How do you intentionalität, like the phenomenological intention, like the kind of sense that there's this idea, intentionality in phenomenology, that everything, like we never think, we just don't think abstractly. When we think, we always think of something, right? So that this, if you like, the subject is implicated in the thought, that we are already there, and the object is also implicated in the thinking subject. So there is this notion of intention or intentionality that you, if you like, the object is within the subject, yeah? But I don't think that this is what you have in mind, although...
Not exactly. And I'm not sure, like, it's just that I don't know, I'm thinking more of creation and architecture and the way architecture deals with intention in a project. Or,
Yes.
I think it's more like purposefulness.
Maybe a gesture.
Yeah.
I'm opening up the discussion. I don't know. I'm okay. So it has to do perhaps with authorship and with you know, the power one has over the tools, the creation that comes from using the tool and the specific technology.
I'm listening.
So I don't know if there's something that is related to that.
Yes, absolutely. I think so. So you see, what one of the things that Heidegger does, and by the way, he was an Aristotelian scholar in the sense that he taught on Aristotle for almost 10 years in a row. He's perhaps more influenced by Aristotle than by Husserl, contentious as that might sound. But one of the kind of things that he has to say is that the silversmith is not a causa efficiens, right? So that the silversmith is not the efficient cause. So he has a very sort of subtle distinction in the way in which he understands poiesis. So because Aristotle says poietikon aetion, right? So poetic cause, so to say. And he has this notion of poiesis. So for Heidegger, to sort of cut the story short, is there you have a responsibility as a craftsman to let something appear. Yes, you do not just cause it. You have the if you'd like, you're not responsible for it, although you have the responsibility for it. That you know, that sounds of course like a prima facie contradiction, but the idea is that you let it sort of show forth rather than you've just cause it. Yeah, and in that sense, he's very much close. A number of thinkers, romantics, but also contemporary thinkers who will think that it's not us that simply produce the works. It's, for example, technology produces works through us. Yes? So we're not responsible, we're not the causa efficiens in that sense. We're just not just doing it ourselves. But we're responsible for what is being produced. Yeah? So, and then his notion of poiesis, of course, relates to the notion of technics. It relates to the notion of episteme. It's a kind of worms. Yeah.
Can I just ask something really pragmatic? Did he ever write about type, as in typesetting?
Who, Heidegger?
Yeah. You know, this typewriter thing, but then it's a craft to hand set mechanical type.
Yeah. Well, as far as I remember, he doesn't mind if you write your book by hand and then you send it to the press. That seems to be okay. You know, like that moment when because then it's simply machination. Then that's nothing. That doesn't then affect the thought. If you see what I mean, then that's reproducibility. We can deal with that. It's the problem of crafting the thoughts through, and I don't know whether you saw the.
I was thinking of craft of the person who typesets it,
yes.
rather than you just sending it off. And
that's right.
Yeah. I think legibility or the whole spacing, all of that subtlety.
I think as a creative practice, it would be amazing as a way to compose thoughts, so simply by typesetting. But I don't know whether you saw the Post recently, the film with Meryl Streep, and like all those. So you see all the important people, and then they send the things, and then the mechanics are there ready to typeset, but they don't even perhaps understand what they're reading. They're just putting those things in their place. So they're practically extensions of the machine, this kind of idea from the metropolis and so on, that the human body becomes only an accessory to the machine. So the typesetters in this whole story are just cogs. They're just waiting there to you know, like they give them 10 minutes. Okay, you just do it. Yeah. So, but I think as a creative practice, it would be terribly interesting to see how can you actually compose a text if you were to typeset. Very laborious, right?
I mean, it's becoming really, you know, the hand letter. It's now people are really sort of claiming it as something really handcrafted.
Mm. I think Heidegger would like that aspect of it.
So that's why I was.
Yeah. Yes.
It seems to me that you started the discussion on this distinction between human as opposed to nature. The example of the ape and the human. A thing that came to my mind was in contemporary thought, even some go as far as thinking that some species of apes have rights, right? So art can be considered human. How do we reconcile, right, this whole discussion on technology as emerging against nature, if we can also think of it as a result or a component of it? A biosphere being added to a technosphere.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a question that personally I find terribly important. I've worked a lot on animals. I would claim that it's not just higher primates, perhaps, that we need to consider, but rather everything: plants, minerals. Yeah, but the picture is sort of very important. He has a huge go at Rilke, Heidegger, when he talks in the Duino elegies about the animal that sees with 1,000 eyes, right? And supposedly it is the animal that is restricted for Heidegger. So Heidegger has this distinction between stones. They are weltlos, they have no world. They're animals that are weltarm, as he calls it. That is, they're poor in world. And then there's humans who are weltbildend. They build worlds. You see? Here is the architectural issue again. The hand that builds, and so on. That one hand that builds.
And this is where this idea of orangutan building their almost structures, material structures, which they inhabit in the tree, right?
Yeah.
So this is contradicts this categorical distinction on which all this seems to be based on.
Not just that. I think I was recently watching a short documentary on ravens, who are exceptionally smart. Exceptionally. For their size, they're perhaps the smartest animals. And they were claiming they have funerary rites, ravens, right? So I would, and that's something that Derrida does. Give one definition of the human, where you start by saying human is the animal that, and you will find yourself in trouble, right? If you say man is the animal that has reason, what is that? What is it that we have exactly? Is the political animal? Surely there's power structures in the animal kingdom. Is the animal that laughs? Is that quite the case? Plato even says somewhere is the animal that dances. Do animals not dance?
The animal that produces surplus value.
Surplus value, yeah. Well, for example, or exactly, we can claim that. But is it the case? Can we? Like, that's the thing. I'd be interested to see the animal kingdom. Do they not produce? No. Are you certain about that? Okay. Okay, that maybe we found it. I don't know, but like Lacan says, it's the human is the animal that dissimulates the simulation. Animals can dissimulate, but they cannot dissimulate on a second order, right? There's all those definitions, and I think you could say with Heidegger is among other definitions, the Dasein is the being that for which its being is at issue, or an issue. So that is so, and for someone like Agamben, who's also very influenced by Heidegger, he will say, for whom language is an issue, the uncertainty of language is an issue. I believe you have Thanos talking to you about Agamben in a few. So the kind of status, for example, of the oath in language, the uncertainty of the oath proceeds from that for the uncertainty of the status of language, which becomes an issue for the human. Therefore, the human needs to produce an oath. So, if you like, the human is the animal that takes an oath for Agamben. Yeah, you can find all those definitions. I think Derrida would say they're all problematic, and look at what Stigler has to say about that. He says, provided I can find it after all this. Oh yes, he says, because what is at stake, among other things, in the hand is its indetermination, right? We might go as far back as Aristotle and say, well, Aristotle calls the hand the tool of tools, because through the hand you can appropriate every tool. The same way he says that the soul is the form of forms. So as the soul is formless, it can assume different forms. I think of red, my soul assumes the shape, form, of quality of red. Okay, so the soul is the form of forms, the hand is the tool of tools. That's a very strange formulation, a very strange genitive. One wonders, what does it mean? Is it a tool, if it is a tool of tools, or is it no tool, for example? And it becomes complex, but you start with that idea, you start with the idea that the hand is this perhaps tool, or a very peculiar type of tool. And that is an idea of, today we would say, indetermination, right? So it means that the hand is no tool in specific, but is potentially any tool. That is an indetermination, right? So you can say the indetermination of the hand is what determines it, okay? And then he says, Stigler, since there is a margin of indetermination in the individual memory, there is neuronal plasticity that makes learning possible. But in human beings, there is a third memory that animals do not have, technics, that both supports and constitutes this memory. So you see, it's the tertiary retention, as Stigler calls it, that is the technological support for memory, is what animals do not have, according to Stigler. He says, it is this direct transmission of individual experiences between generations that is forbidden in the animal kingdom. I cannot tell you what I went through as a young ape so that you are kind of cautious and don't repeat my mistakes, right? I can do that biologically, but I cannot tell you the story. So he says, and this is why there is neither an animal culture nor an animal spirit. Or to put it more simply, there is no heredity possible for acquired characters. But if you show me that certain apes have such cultures, I include them in the human world. Right? So here's the massive twist of Stigler. By the way, that's from an interview. So, you go down this path, and then there's the cautionary moment where you think, oh, maybe they do some of that. Maybe they can tell a story. Maybe then they can. But there seems to be no tertiary retention, no technological support for memory. Yeah, no hard drive to store all the experiences. There's none of that, and there is no what he calls the epiphylogenesis. That is the kind of accruement of non-hereditary traits that we have as humans. And so that is the whole complication of technology, the human. Yes, I can see.
The question of evolution. I mean, how can we situate technology with evolution? Is that parallel or is that like a contrast element? Because I mean, the technology for me, one of the best definition is when the human being starts to create its own evolution by his tools and his environment, and then it's the base of civilization.
Quite. The problem is locating the specific moment and asking the question of the egg and the chicken, yes? So is that what it comes down to, unfortunately? This mutual implication to the effect that before you have a tool, you cannot have a hand. Because insofar as the hand is the tool of tools, and there are no tools,
yes,
you cannot have a hand.
Yes, I mean, when we arrive to this point of a hand and maybe a mind and all this to make a fire and start like controlling the night and controlling our relation to our food, or start to make our own tools. I mean, we arrive to a point of evolution where we can use our hands and our mind to control our environment.
Yes.
We are detached from evolution to create civilization. Maybe it's so like, is that parallel?
Yeah, but so for example, someone like Derrida reading Le Roi Gorin and so on would say is that technology also is part of the animal kingdom. You know, we can see all sorts of technologies.
But maybe not animal. Yes, it is animal. Is it animal?
Yes, I would say so. I mean, beavers make dams, for example. Bees make hives.
Yes.
And so on. I mean, you can find countless examples. The question is, okay, you can say, well, that's biologically determined. Well, what does that mean? Like what? And
but it takes another dimension with the human. Like.
Of course it does. But that's the thing. Of course it does, because the position of Heidegger is Derrida is two things. It's for one thing not to say, oh, here's the human and then here's all the animals and they have a common characteristic, but also not to say they're all one thing. Like it's not just like there's huge distinctions. I mean, in some ways it's indeed like absurd to say animals and include in that category the amoeba and the bonobo and then say human. You know, we're clearly much closer to the bonobo than the amoeba is. Yeah? So I'm saying we need to be attentive to uniqueness. We have to. It's not like it's all just a grey sort of mess of stuff. But we also need to think of the continuity, the relation that is sort of constitutive of both. What is precisely that, if you like, moves and produces those differences? The differences between Homo sapiens and I don't know, Homo erectus, for example. What is that play of coding, if you like? And that is another dimension that it seems I'm not going to have the opportunity to really discuss. But the idea that Derrida talks all the time about writing, right? But actually we can think of codes instead. We can think of programming in the kind of biological, sort of genetic level. Yeah? So writing takes place within the cell. It takes place in computers. It takes place, so for him, he would maintain a notion of inscription that is sort of prior to those specific manifestations of writing.
There's something strange happens in the computer, where writing is, or design is transformed into a number to be be able to be computed.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, of course, there exists something like a coding language, but it's probably something very, very different from its operations than it is written language. I don't know.
I think. Go ahead.
There's no semantics.
There's no semantics. No. Well, at the level of the digital flow, right? The question is, does that then is also that translatable within a semantic. So at what point does noise become meaningful, I would say. But first of all, is the issue of, I would say, not even numbers. What computers do is they digitize. So effectively, that is a 1-0, but it's not a 1-0. It's simply a relation of presence and absence. And even that, if you look at it electronically, like at the very constitution, it becomes like quite a complex issue. It becomes like a haze of like electrons, right? It's not exactly a presence and an absence, but like this nebulous quasi-presence and quasi-absence. So, but it's interesting because the digital is the finger. Yeah, the digit in the Latin is the finger. So it's interesting to think again how, I mean, you can say just that's a humanization, anthropomorphism, and so on. But really, the relation of presence, absence. How does that? What is particularly manual about that, if there is anything? Probably nothing. I think the digital is precisely the non-manual, but. I think it's yeah, and moving on to your suggestion, yes. What types of inscriptions are meaningful and what do not? Because traditionally we thought that the writer decided that, right? If I wrote those words, these were the words. There were no other words. You see, that was it. I chose my words carefully. Each one there was. No noise. If there was some spill of ink, that was it. But other than that, there was no noise. But if I record this discussion, there's people leaving the room, there's laughter, there's the grain of my voice. These are sort of unintended effects, which you can sort of designate as noise or perhaps as meaningful information, right? And you can see at certain moments the relationship of ground and figure becoming important. Sort of against what does something appear as not noise? Yeah, and that the question is, who makes this figuration? Is it a computer, for example, that picks up certain frequencies and at the NSA overhearing us? Yeah, and says, they're talking about terrorism now. It's not noise. Yeah. So, or is it because they don't do it like because someone overhears? So they have machines that can extrapolate different types of noise and say which one is meaningful. Or is it an artist? With John Cage and all sorts of types of composition, whether you just kind of record the cars on the street and you say that's just the production of music, or do you allow a computer to simply generate stuff? Big questions, I think, in composition for composers, so to say.
I was wondering if you could explain more when you mentioned Derrida, I think specifically talking about architecture, and that it resists linearization, and you said it could even resist meaning in a logocentric understanding.
Yeah.
What do you think Derrida means with that? Or
again, that was perhaps my if you like extrapolation to some extent, the resistance of meaning. It is very much this idea that we understand meaning sort of rather narrowly, I would say. The visual arts have tried for a very long time to claim a distinct meaning, right? But how can you translate, let's say, a symphony? Berlioz would hand out a text that would say what the symphony that he had composed said, right? What was that symphony about? Like, he would just give a text to tell people what it was about. Is that how it's supposed to be? Clearly not, right? We know of examples. So, for example, when Shostakovich would compose, I don't know, the Eighth or something, people would cry because they knew that this was a critique of Stalinism, right? But when we listen to it today, do we cry? Are we affected the same way? What? Because all those things sort of elude us, right? So within specific contexts, it is, you might say that a certain meaning emerges from non-verbal forms of expression. Yeah, so you know what this piece of music means. Yeah, I could give you more examples of that, but it's very hard. It's very hard to produce this translation. You cannot just simply one-to-one see a choreography and say, "Oh, that's what it means. It means freedom," or it means, I don't know, surplus value. And some themes, some themes are quite easy. Hatred and love, friendship, and sort of disgust. Certain basic sort of dispositions are very easy to express, let's say, with dance. Yeah?
I think so.
Yeah, it is. It is quite. It is. But I think other things, like more abstract things, become hard to articulate. Yeah, equality. How do you dance equality? And it becomes.
From a Bedouin perspective, equality has no meaning. It's truth, and there's no. The lack of semantics is not actually a problem at all for truth.
Okay. Yes.
Actually, to use a concrete example, in his debate with Jacques-Alain Miller over the truth character of mathematics, he uses the Turing machine as an example of something without semantics.
Yes.
But which is able, through the theoretical infinity of the mechanism, to produce truth, to sustain a truth extension.
Yes. Well,
that's maybe the alternative.
Yeah, no,
technology coming from a different angle.
I'm very much like, I do believe in that. There's this joke in Hitchhiker's Galaxy where they make the computer to tell them the answer to everything, right? Mm-hmm. And then it's 42 or something. And then they have to make a bigger computer to tell them what this answer means. And the whole problem in that is precisely that we need to translate a certain code into another code for us to be intelligible. Yes, maybe for the computer that is directly, but traditionally the issue would be what we call Anschauung, what we call intuition, right? Intuition in the sense of just having a view of something, right? So there is this debate, for example, that was, it was big already with Kant and goes back to Plato, whether, for example, geometry, which is algebraized, is always supposed to refer back ultimately to an intuition. So maybe we don't directly intuit the Pythagorean theorem, for example, but we could break it down into figures so that we could see what that means, right? Clearly, that is a losing sort of line of thinking for geometers. They don't believe they need to intuit that they have to have a correspondence of geometry. It is a question whether these are simply the limits of our humanity. Whether we can, so for example, how do you grasp no lines passing through 2 points or infinite lines passing through 2 points? Like, what does that mean? If you see what I mean, like, it's easy. You can
demonstrate it not to mean anything. Its truth is completely independent from its intuitability. That's what non-Euclidean space demonstrated. That's why the definition of truth depends on extension, rather than on semantics.
Exactly, but then the question is, you can clearly do a number of things with those things. You can build satellites, you can have signal transmissions, and so on. But I still claim that we here reach our limits. We just perhaps indeed need to hand it over to computers. There's no, yeah, like. So I'm interested. I'm deeply interested in that. I'm deeply interested. I think that there is. This is where the stakes are. This is where the future is. To engaging with what does not correspond to intuition, with what is exceeds the kind of order of because intuition, supposedly. That is the absurd thing. We have this idea that intuition, right, is the solution to meaning. So, for example, that when I say horse, I see a horse, yeah? So I intuit that the essence of the horse in my mind. I don't have a horse in front of me, but in my mind's eye, I do intuit it. And that satisfies me. The word just produces that, so, or recalls that. The problem is that if you go the other way around, if I show you a horse, you might say saddle. You don't necessarily have the transferability of the two things. Yeah, that the problem is that although we want to produce intuition as the anchor of our concepts, the visuality in itself is not necessarily of the order of meaning. You can have things that are not translatable into words, that are not. How do you describe a specific shade? We have no word for that. For example, how do you describe chance passages of wafts of air? Yeah, like those things that perhaps have a certain order of visibility, they don't translate into anything that is graspable at the conceptual level, and therefore doesn't. So I find that one of the many problems that, of course, the metaphor is that we move from the concept to the intuition, but the problem is that the visibility that is evoked there is surely not enough to ground conceptuality in its turn. We don't directly translate. We can say a number of things about Kandinsky painting, but we cannot make a story out of it. We cannot say, this is a painting about such and such. So the visual order in itself is not, So I think it's interesting that then nonetheless we have this notion of intuition. All right. Yeah. If no one wants to say anything, thank you very much. There's this event apparently outside for the disappearance of the commons. I found out as I arrived. I didn't know. That is an unimaginable development, and yet it's happened. So maybe we should go to that. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.